We were on a journey to visit our relatives, our nephews and nieces, and first, second and third cousins, and the other descendants of our grandfathers who live in the east side of these truly hospitable mountains, said Thorin, not knowing quite what to say all at once in a moment, when obviously the exact truth would not do at all.
He's a liar! A tremendous liar!
Said one of the drivers.
Several of our people struck by lightning in the cave. That's what they were. Struck by lightning when we invited these creatures to come below. They're dead as stones. Also, I'll not explain this.
He held out the sword which Thorin had worn, the sword which came from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth, clashed their shields, and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time, when the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills or did battle before their walls. They had called it Orcrist, Goblin Cleaver, but the goblins called it simply Biter, and they hated it. They hated it worse, anybody who carried it.
Murderers! Murderers and elf friends!
The great goblin shouted.
Slash them! Beat them! Bite them! Blast them! Take them away to dark holes full of snakes! Never let them see the light again!
He was in such a rage that he jumped off his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth open. Just at that moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went poof into a tower of blue glowing smoke right up to the roof that scattered piercing white sparks all among the goblins. The yells and yammering, croaking, gibbering, jabbering, howls, growls and curses, shrieking and striking that followed were beyond description. Several hundred wildcats and wolves being roasted alive together slowly would not have compared to it. The sparks were burning holes in the goblins, and the smoke that now fell from the roof made the air too thick for even their eyes to see through. Soon they were falling over one another and rolling in heaps on the floor, biting and kicking and fighting, as if they had all gone mad. Suddenly, a sword flashed in its own light. Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood, dumbfounded, in the middle of his rage. He fell dead, and the goblin soldiers fled before the sword, shrieking into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath. "Follow me, quick!" said a voice, fierce and quiet. Before Bilbo understood what was happening, he was trotting along again as fast as he could trot at the end of the line, down more dark passages, with the yells of the goblin hall growing fainter behind him. A pale light was leading them on. "Quicker, quicker!" said the voice. "The torches will soon be relit." "Have a minute!" said Dory, who was at the back next to Bilbo, and a decent fellow. He made the hobbit scramble on his shoulders as best he could with his tied hands, and then off they went at a run, with a click-click of chains and many a stumble, since they had no hands to steady themselves with. Not for a long while did they stop, and by that time they must have been right down into the very mountain's heart. Then Gandalf lit up his wand. Of course, it was Gandalf. But just then they were too busy to ask how he got there. He took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burnt with a rage that made a gleam if goblins were about. Now it was bright as blue flame for delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblin chains and setting all the prisoners free as quick as possible. This sword's name was Glamdring, the foe-hammer, if you remember. But the goblins called it Beater and hated it worse than Biter, if possible. Orcrist too had been saved, for Gandalf had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Gandalf thought of most things, and though he could not do everything, he could do a great deal for his friends in a tight corner. "Are we all here?" said he, handing his sword back to Thorin with a bow. "Let me see. 1, that's Thorin, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Where are Killy and Philly? Oh, here they are, 12, 13. And here's Mr. Baggins, 14. Well, it might have been worse, and then again, it might have been a good deal better. No ponies, no food, no knowing quite where we are. Hordes of angry goblins, very angry goblins, right behind us. All right, on we go!" On they went. Gandalf was quite right. They began to hear goblin noises and horrible cries far behind in the passages they'd come through. That sent them on faster than ever, and as poor Bilbo could not possibly go half as fast, for dwarfs can roll along at a tremendous pace, I can tell you, when they have to, they took it in turns to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarfs, and these goblins knew the way better. They had made the paths themselves, after all, and were madly angry, so that do what they could, the dwarfs heard the cries, howling, closer and closer. Soon they could hear every flap of the goblins' feet, many, many feet, which seemed only just around the last corner. The blink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel, and they were following, and they were getting deadly tired.
Why? Oh, why did I ever leave my hobbit hole?
Said poor Mr. Baggins, bumping up and down on Bombur's back.
Why, oh, why did I ever bring a wretched hobbit on a treasure hunt?
Said poor Bombur, who was fat and staggered along with sweat dripping down his nose in his heat and terror. At this point, Gandalf fell behind, and Thorin with him. They turned a sharp corner.
About turn!
He shouted.
Draw your sword, Thorin!
There was nothing else to be done, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying around the corner in full cry, and found Goblin Cleaver and Foe Hammer shining cold and bright right in their astonished faces. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave out a yell before they were suddenly killed. The ones behind yelled still more and leapt back, knocking over those who were running after them.
Bite her and beat her!
They shrieked, and soon they were all in confusion, and most of them were hustling and bustling back the way they had come. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn that corner. By that time the dwarves had gone on again, a long, long way on into the dark tunnels of the goblins' realm. When the goblins discovered that, they put out their torches, they slipped on soft shoes, and chose out their very quickest runners with their sharpest ears and eyes. These ran forward as swift as weasels in the dark, and with hardly any more noise than bats' wings. That is why neither Bilbo, nor the dwarves, nor even Gandalf heard them coming, nor did they see them, but they were seen themselves by goblins that ran silently up behind, for Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarfs as they went along. Quite suddenly, Dory, now at the back, again carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind in the dark. He shouted and fell, and the hobbit rolled off his shoulders and into blackness, bumped his head on hard rock, and remembered nothing. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Riddles in the Dark. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as with them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, he could see nothing, he could feel nothing except the stone of the floor. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all fours till he touched the wall of the tunnel, but neither up nor down could he find anything. Nothing at all, no sign of goblins, no sign of dwarfs. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction of which they were going, in which he had taken his fall. He guessed as well as he could, and crawled along for a good will, till suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket, almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem of any particular use or importance at that moment. He did not go much further, but sat on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long, long while. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some meal or another, but that only made him more miserable. He could not think of what to do, nor he could think what had happened, or why he had been left behind, or why the goblins had not caught him. His head was so sore. The truth was he had been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind, in a very dark, quiet corner for a long while. After some time he felt for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch, and there was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. Then he felt for matches, and he could not find any. That shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him, as he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what the striking of matches and the smell of tobacco would have brought on in the dark holes of that dark, horrible place. Still, at the moment he felt very crushed, but in slapping all his pockets and feeling all round for matches, his hand came on the hilt of his little sword, the little dagger that he had gotten from the trolls he had quite forgotten about. Nor, fortunately, had the goblins noticed it, as he wore it inside his breeches. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes. So, it's an elvish blade too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, yet not far enough away. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars, in which so many songs had been sung, and also he noticed that such weapons made a great impression on goblins that came upon him suddenly. Go back? He thought. No, not at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward? Only thing to do. On we go. So up he got, and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him and one hand feeling the wall and his heart, all of a patter and a pitter. Now, suddenly Bilbo was in what's called a tight place, but you must remember it was not quite so tight for him as it would have been for me or you. Hobbits are not quite like ordinary people, and after all, if their holes are nice, cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of the goblins, still, they're more used to tunnelling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground, not when their heads have recovered from being bumped. Also, they can move very quietly and hide easily and recover wonderfully from falls and bruises, and they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard or have forgotten long ago. I should not have liked to have been in Mr. Baggins's place all the same. The tunnel seemed to have no end. All he knew was that it was going down pretty steadily, and keeping in the same direction in spite of a twist and a turn or two. There were passages leading off to the side every now and then, and he knew by the glimmer of his sword he could feel with his palm on the wall. Of these he took no notice, except to hurry past for fear of goblins or half-imagined darker things coming out of them. On he went, and down, and still he heard no sound of anything except the occasional whir of a bat by his ears, which started him at first, until it became too frequent to bother about. I do not know how long he kept on like this, hating to go on, not daring to stop, on, until he was tireder than tired. It seemed like all the way to tomorrow and over it to the days beyond. Suddenly, without any warning, he trotted splash into water. Ugh! It was icy cold. That pulled him up short and sharp. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path, or the edge of an underground stream that crossed the passage, or the brink of a deep, dark subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all. He stopped, and he could hear. When he listened hard, drops, drip, drip, dripping from an unseen roof in the water below, but there seemed no other sort of sound. So, it's a pool or a lake, not an underground river, he thought. Still, he did not dare to wade out into darkness. He could not swim, and he thought too of nasty, slimy things with big, bulging, blind eyes wriggling in the water. There are strange things living in the pools and the lakes at the hearts of mountains. Fish whose fathers swam in, good knows know how many years ago, and never swam out again, while their eyes grew bigger and bigger and bigger from trying to see in the blackness. And there are other things, more slimy than fish. Even the tunnels and the caves the goblins had made themselves. There are other things living unbeknownst to them that have sneaked in from the outside to lie up in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back in their beginnings to ages even before the goblins, who only widened them and joined them up with passages, and the original owners, they're still there, in the dark corners, slinking and nosing about. Deep down here, by the dark water, lived old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about fairly quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large, dangling feet over the side, but never a ripple did he make, not he. He was looking out with his pale lamplight eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat too. Goblin he thought good when he could get it, but he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind if they ever came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for he had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there at the very roots of the mountains. They had come on the lake when they were tunnelling down long ago, and they found that they could go no further, so there the road ended in that direction. There was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. Actually, Gollum lived in a slimy little island